Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we are here today to talk about The Division. The day is finally upon us. The Division is in our hands. I've been playing quite a bit of it. I've pushed into, I believe now, near the 10-hour mark. Now, we're going to do things a little bit differently with this first impressions. Number one, we're not going to be talking at all about the Dark Zone. I feel like I've covered a lot of the Dark Zone in the beta, and I know it hasn't changed that much. We will definitely be doing videos on the Dark Zone in the future, but they won't so much be in an impressions or review fashion. I mean, I do have plans after I spent a lot of time in the Dark Zone with doing a sort of, you know, looking back at things, seeing how the Dark Zone as a whole functions and works towards the end game, but right now, it doesn't make sense to cover it in my first impressions. So we're going to be talking solely about the cooperative aspect of The Division. And I felt the best place to start, especially to avoid a lot of the boring stuff that we're going to talk about later on, including, you know, the crafting and all of the smaller systems that the game features, was to start with the combat loop, you know, the core gameplay loop of The Division. Is it better than it was in the beta? Is it any good? Is it enjoyable? You know, what do I have to say about it? Now, I've been playing for most of last night, most of this morning with my brother and myself, but I also had the opportunity to play with a larger group for a good part of the day as well. We had two of our other friends join up with us, and this was something I was really looking forward to doing because I wanted to see how the mission sort of changed and scaled depending on the number of players that you had in them, and of course the difficulty that you were playing the missions on. Also, the level of the players within any given squad. And it turns out there's a lot of weird things that actually happen here. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about the difficulty settings that you can choose when you go to boot into an actual mission. Now, all of the missions in the game can be played on normal or hard. Some of them will be able to be replayed at level 30 on what they're calling challenge mode. This is an end game variant of some of the missions that are available in the game, and it's hopefully going to be the sort of beat your head against the wall difficult mission that I would expect it to be, with a name like challenge mode. That being said, hard isn't really a complete pushover. In fact, I think in a lot of ways it meets a nice little sweet spot. But here's the thing about it. Depending on the number of people you have in your squad, the difficulty seems to really vary. For example, my brother and I, playing just with the two of us on hard mode, didn't really see an excessive challenge. Was it an enjoyable challenge? Yes, I think it's a nice difficulty mode, hard mode, with two people. However, throw one other player into the mix and things seriously ramp up on hard mode. Especially if that player is even slightly under-leveled, meaning that they're not going to be able to do the same amount of damage as, you know, the other two members of your squad. Things really get crazy when you add more players into the mix, and I can imagine that a 4-player squad is going to see some serious challenge when it comes to the hard mode, mainly because they throw a lot more enemies at you. They also increase the number of elite tier enemies, so enemies with yellow health bars or even purple health bars. I have to say, the normal difficulty setting was way too easy. In fact, my brother and I only played the first mission once on normal before realizing we could play all the missions on hard mode and then move forward. That was the precinct mission that you're seeing a little bit of here. After that, everything we did, hard mode only. We didn't see any reason to play on normal. We wanted the increased challenge, not to mention the bonus rewards that you get from playing on hard mode. You get more credits, enemies are going to grant more XP because they're harder to kill, and on top of that, you're going to have a opportunity to get better loot, equipment, blueprints, so on and so forth, that are higher ranking than what you would get from running a normal mission. So in my opinion, when and if you play The Division, there is no reason to play on normal mode. It's kind of like an entry-level difficulty for maybe someone who hasn't even played a game like this, doesn't understand cover-based shooters, doesn't understand shooters at all, and is really just learning the game. Other than that, hard mode all the way. I'd say they've done a very good job with it. I had a lot of concerns when looking back at the beta. You guys heard me talk on The Division Weekly that it wasn't going to be difficult enough. Now, what we saw of one of the developers a while back playing a mission on hard, he was only over-leveled by like 2 levels. Well, that's all it takes to really make a mission a bit of a pushover. My brother and I playing with just the two of us, because we were playing every single mission on hard, we found ourselves gaining XP more rapidly and becoming more well-equipped. Some of the missions we ran, we weren't really necessarily out-leveling them, but we definitely out-geared them, and they became much easier than they were when our gear was kind of on point. So being over-leveled for a mission definitely can affect its overall difficulty level. And I imagine that's going to be even greater when you actually get to the higher level content. So just something to keep in mind when you're running through the missions, you know, to be, I don't know, like, you know, if you end up being over leveled, that's fine. I would say that the only situations in which that really seems to happen is if you're running a lot of friends through the lower level missions on the harder difficulties. You might find yourself then going back to the normal content and find yourself a little bit over leveled. But at the end of the day, I think they did a really great job balancing the hard mode. And I'm really looking forward to checking out challenge mode. That's going to be something we're going to cover in a completely different video. And you guys are going to notice that. Like I said, we're going to talk about a lot about the initial and core gameplay elements of the Division today. And then down the line, as we gain access to the endgame content, because I'm sorry, I just could not put in 24 hours like a lot of people did day one, we will start to talk about those components of the game further down the road. So let's talk, you know, now that we're past the difficulty, let's actually talk about the gunplay. The core gameplay, you know, the cover-based shooting firefights that make up every single element of the Division's combat. Now, I'm going to be straightforward with you. You can boil it all down and just say, oh, you just kill a bunch of things. Well, yeah, it's a third-person cover-based shooter. That's exactly what you do. But there is an element of variety in the missions, and it comes in a lot of different layers. Number one, not all of the missions are just straightforward kill missions. There are a lot of objective-based missions that see you activating, you know, power sources or retrieving certain pieces of intel, all while dealing with enemies. But I think the biggest element of variety, of diversity between the missions is, of course, the environments. This is the great thing about placing a shooter like this in a giant open world, is you have all of these different environments, and as you go throughout the game, leveling up and going to the different missions, they're in different bureaus of New York City, they're different parts of New York City, they're underground, they're in abandoned factories. There's so much diversity in the environmental design. It makes sure that you're never replaying, you know, the same sort of structured combat arena ever. I mean, unless you go back and play the same mission, there is always a completely different setting. You got completely different layouts. You're in small office buildings like we're doing here inside of the precinct. You know, you're in a parking garage. Then you move forward to something like the Lincoln Tunnel mission, which in itself has a bunch of diversity. You know, you're starting off pushing on this really narrow tunnel. You've got basically 2 lanes with the road, and then you've got the pedestrian walkway. Then you open up into a more of a factory setting, and then you're out on this huge open sort of, you know, tollway. A lot of diversity within the missions themselves, again, because you're pushing through an actual real open world. Like, that element has really made mission after mission enjoyable for me, and I look forward, you know, to the next mission. What's the next mission going to be like? Where's it going to take us? Like, the locales are really interesting, and of course that is all because they decided to set the game in this big open world, and they didn't just instance off, you know, different little areas like, you know, you're going to go to the Lincoln Tunnel, you're going to go to Madison Square Garden, and so on and so forth. Like, that provides a lot of value to the combat, and I really, really dig what they did with that. One of the smaller details I noticed as well, one of the things I really enjoyed is how much control the player has for the initial attack when engaging in a firefight. It reminds me a bit of the concealment mechanic in XCOM 2. Now, there's not really a stealth mechanic in The Division, just in the same way there's not really a solid stealth mechanic in XCOM 2. But initially, when setting up with enemies, you do have time to get yourself positioned, you can watch the enemies, see what they do for a little bit, and as long as you keep yourself concealed, you can really plan out your initial attack. You can drop a stun, have a teammate drop a turret, then throw a frag grenade, and then, you know, unload on the team. Like, that's actually a lot of fun. There's something really satisfying about being the wolf, and there's actually a really corny line in the story at one point.
I just don't like the idea of throwing you to the wolves.
Captain, we are the wolves.
Where Fei Lao says, we are the wolves. But it's like true, it really works that way in the way that the missions are set up. But at the same time, you can very easily go from being the wolf to being the sheep, or at least the wolf being chased by a possibly bigger wolf, possibly a werewolf. If you really let yourself get overwhelmed, you don't pay attention, the enemy will overrun you. And this is probably one of the biggest things we need to talk about. You know, obviously, the enemies are bullet sponges. The game uses an extended time to kill to help drag out firefights, which is something I thoroughly enjoy. It gives you the opportunity to really use a lot of your gadgets and your equipment. I've said this before when we talked about the beta. You know, if you like that style of game, you're going to like The Division. If you don't like that style of game, you're probably going to hate The Division. But that's really what the AI has going for them. You know, they have their health on the higher difficulties. You have shields that you have to deal with. They're not incredibly intelligent, but you'll realize, and this is something I noticed just from dealing with the Riders and then moving forward to deal with the Cleaners, is that the different factions have different sets of tactics and strategies based on their actual knowledge. The Riders are just a bunch of street punks. They run around with baseball bats. They're not really well organized. They don't have great tactics. Their main strategy is to overwhelm you and to rush you. That's pretty much it. The Cleaners, on the other hand, know a little bit about coordination. They know a little bit about harassment. They like to use their you know, basically ridiculously far-reaching flamethrowers. And they like to try and, you know, burn you. They set you on fire. They like to try and swarm you and overwhelm you with grenades and, you know, lots and lots of fire, basically. And they like to flank you. They will do their best to show up behind you when you least expect it. Like I said, the AI isn't, you know, it's not going to win any awards for groundbreaking AI, but it does enough to make sure that you are always on your toes. You're always aware of the situation. You're trying to make sense of how many enemies are on the battlefield. You know, where'd this one go? Are we getting flanked? What's happening? Because, like, seriously, on hard mode, especially, you know, just the smallest lapse of concentration can lead to you being overran and set on fire, and then it's just kind of game over at that point. No amount of healing is going to recover you from some of the situations that you can genuinely get yourself into. And that's a really satisfying feeling. You know, you can really work together and coordinate, and things can go really well. Sometimes maybe even a little bit too smoothly. But if you let your concentration slip, the brown stuff's going to hit the fan real fast and spray right out the window into the street. So I really dig what they did with the combat. It's a love it or hate it situation, though. Like, honestly, Destiny has a very specific combat loop, right? The Division is the same way. You know, it's a game about completing missions, killing enemies, completing smaller objectives, and then doing it all over again. In this case, you are progressing the story. You know, you're unlocking new areas, you're leveling up your character, you're dealing with gear and equipment and perks and talents. You know, it has a lot more RPG components than a game like Destiny, and that's a big driving point for me. You know, one of the reasons I really enjoy the game. But I think at the end of the day, when we look back at the combat loop, one of the biggest things that plays into it is that environmental design. I want to stress that one more time. The environmental design in this game is so on point, man. They did such an amazing job with this, you know, pseudo recreation of New York City. The environments just, they always feel like you're moving forward, you're in a different location, and they're just really enjoyable places to engage in combat in. I totally dig what they've done with that. Now, I wanted to move forward and talk a little bit about some of the systems that we really didn't get to see entirely fleshed out in the beta. Number one being the crafting system. The crafting system is actually really simple, but it has a lot of layers to it. You know, they didn't make it excessively simple. It's enough for someone like me who likes the idea of crafting, but hates when crafting becomes an unnecessary grind like it was in... you know, like it was in RPG MMOs going back 5-6 years. You know, look at the crafting system in WoW 6 years ago, and it was a serious task to actually craft supplies and make anything worthwhile. Now, you obtain blueprints in the Division simply by running side missions and, you know, little tiny side ops. That'll actually tell you straightforward if one of the mission rewards is a blueprint. Blueprints, just like weapons and equipment, are tiered. So you have, you know, standard, specialized, high-end, so on and so forth. Green, blue, purple, and gold. On top of that, the resources, the materials, the mats, essentially, that you use to craft those pieces of equipment, those weapons, are also tiered in the same way. So in the case that you're seeing me right here messing around with the crafting system, you know, we're going to need specialized fabric and specialized electronics to craft specialized gloves. Now, one of the awesome things that you can do is you can actually go ahead and break down and convert materials. So you can take all of those green materials, convert them into blue materials. You can take your blue materials and convert them into high-end materials, and so on and so forth. Now, materials can be found out in the open world. There are actually specific material gathering locations that will have a cooldown, so you can go back to them on a regular, you know, on a daily basis, essentially, to get more materials, more mats. You can also break down weapons and equipment that you got for components of the same rank, so specialized equipment will break down into specialized materials. On top of that, each of the 3 wings, so you have your security wing, you have your medical wing, and your tech wing, they all have an upgrade to each of the wings that will grant you passive materials over time, every 12 hours. So there's a lot of ways to earn those materials. They're definitely in abundance. It's all about you taking the initiative to actually craft things. It's not necessary. I'll be completely honest. I'm someone who enjoys the crafting, even though I haven't had too many great blueprints yet. I've had a couple that have been really handy. My brother, on the other hand, has just pretty much resorted to buying any equipment that he saw that looked really great. On top of that, you're always earning weapon and gear from simply running missions, and if you're in the dark zone especially, you're going to be able to get a lot of great gear. So it's an alternative. I don't think it's required to craft, but there's no doubt that you will be able to make some awesome stuff with crafting and the blueprint system as you push further towards the end game. So definitely something that I would not ignore. Now, I should briefly note, too, the number of things you can actually craft, in case you guys are wondering. Firearms, the modifications for firearms, all of the gear that you would equip, plus all the modifications that you could then equip to the gear. That's right, we don't just have modifications for firearms like red dots and foregrips, we also have mods that can be applied to your gear that give you stat bonuses, like, maybe additionally healing effect. A lot of them are related to the 3 different tiers of skills that you get from the 3 different wings. So, some good stuff, man. You can really build some good stuff in crafting, and I like that they've made it worthwhile. And like I said, it's not overly complex, but it definitely has some layers to make it interesting. Now, I really want to talk about, we're not going to go too heavily into the story and how it's structured. That's something I want to talk about at a later date. I think talking about the story as a whole is something that I should do after I played the entire game, and something that should be done in its own. But one of the ways that the game is also delivering story is through the gathering of intel. Intel can be gathered in multiple ways. There's field data, which are basically collectibles like cell phones and drones that tell their own little story. On top of that, there's evidence that directly correlates to each of the 3 wings. So you've got evidence for your medical, which comes in the form of virus reports. You've got evidence for the surveillance data for your tech wing, and then found footage for the security. Now, each of these pieces helps tell a little bit of the story, either some of the story that's past or some of the story that is currently taking place. For example, with the virus reports, you have Candle, basically examining intel or data that you've gained out in the field and letting you know what the situation is on finding a cure for the virus. One of my favorite things, though, and probably one of the darker things, is the found footage from the security. I'm going to let you guys check out some of the found footage right now, actually. This one is, like I said, it's for the security wing, and you actually got it from completing one of the core missions. So all of this intel, this core intel, the evidence, is given to the player from completing missions for each of the 3 wings. So check this found footage out.
Is that it?
Now let me call it in. Dispatch, this is car 2-4. We have visual on unit 5-5. Looks abandoned, over.
Copy that, over. Mother of Christ! Shit, they're behind us! Forget it, just go! Now, now! Dispatch, this is car 2-4. We are over... Car 2-4, what's going on out there?
Dispatch, this is car 2-4. We gotta get back.
So yeah, super dark. There's no doubt that the Rikers are really bad dudes. And I like this because I haven't actually, at this point in the game, when I saw this, encountered the Rikers. So, it's kind of helping building a mystique, a sort of reputation for what the Rikers are all about, and that they're not very good people. And I think that helps represent them as, a faction in the game world. And makes it a little bit more interesting when I run into them. I would have liked to see the same sort of background for the cleaners. Now, you do get to learn a little bit more about the cleaners when you actually engage them, but I think some cool sort of, information like this in-game, some found footage would have helped better establish them. I'm looking forward to seeing what they have with the Last Man Battalion as we move forward. Hopefully there is something indeed. So the game tries to do a bit of storytelling outside of its core storytelling experience, and I totally dig that. I have to admit, I think it's a difficult thing to do for a game that takes place in a setting like this. When you have like a fantasy RPG, it's easy to kind of pump in lore because it's fantasy. But when it's based more in reality, it's much more difficult, I think, to make it believable and interesting. And I think they've done an all right job. We'll talk a little bit about that more when we get into the story in another video. So last thing I really want to talk about, guys, is point out some of the issues that I've had with the game so far at the near 10-hour mark. It's not a lot of stuff, honestly. there's one thing that I found to be completely unacceptable, and there's a few other small things that I just would have liked to see them spend more time with. But don't get me wrong, I genuinely enjoy The Division. I've been playing it all day long. It's a hell of a lot of fun with friends. I really like what they did with the difficulty curve of the missions. I'm really excited to see what happens at endgame, but I'm really just enjoying the game as I go. A lot of it does really have to do with the atmosphere, the environment, the world design. You know, that's the stuff that really clicks for me. Like, you know, being able to actually climb up through these buildings, go out on scaffolding, go up on, you know, the rooftops for a lot of these missions, the sense of verticality. Like, I just never thought they could have built such a large open world and then still, you know, had us going inside of buildings and rambling about through all these areas. I think, like, everyone needs to take some time to respect that. Even if you don't like The Division, the world design is just so freaking on point. The level of detail, the clutter, just everything has been so freaking well done, man. And if you are enjoying the game, it adds to the experience tenfold. It really genuinely does. So let's talk about some of those negatives. And the first one that I have to point out, that I have to absolutely just lambaste Ubisoft with, is their horrible, absolutely horrible character creation options. Now, this is a game that very much is calling itself out as an RPG, right? Well, you know what? As an RPG, I want to build a character that stands out from, you know, the other 10 people that I might encounter when I'm playing the game. The amount of customizations options are so incredibly shallow when compared to just about every other RPG-style experience on the market. There's some other games that have done really poorly. Call of Duty Black Ops 3 is a good example of that. At least in this case, we have both male and female, as well as a variety of ethnicities and races. I should say races, sorry. But within that, there is very little variation. There's more neck tattoos than there are hairdos. The amount of facial hair is just pitiful. Like, I don't know what they were thinking with this. It's pathetic. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrific. The amount of options is so incredibly limited. It's no bueno. It's unacceptable, and it is, man. You know, if I was to do an actual review for this game, I would take it down a peg because of this. I genuinely would. It sucks because the character models, the detail is great, but there's just no variety. I'm not asking for a whole range of sliders and face grabbies like Fallout 4, but that's one thing Destiny did really good, you know? They made sure there was enough combinations that, you know, you felt like your character stood out from the person next to you. You know, it wasn't infinite, and I'm sure the number of combinations was actually small, but it was larger than this, and it did the job in making me feel like my character was unique. Honestly, just more hairstyles alone would have made a big difference for this game. But, alright, let's move past that. One of the things I wasn't super concerned about, but one of the things you guys heard me make mention about in the beta was how I felt that the gunplay, you know, the weapon handling and the diversity among the different weapons just wasn't really there. They didn't feel as good as I thought they could have felt. Now, I know it's a difficult thing to portray in a third-person shooter, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. I always felt Gears of War did a fantastic job with this, separating the different weapons. Even Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter back in the day, you know, did a really great job with this. Future Soldier, not so much in my opinion. But what I wanted to point out was that there definitely seemed to be improvements from what we played in the beta. There's no doubt about that. I think they've done a much better job in terms of designating a larger, I should say this, designating more diverse recoil patterns between the different weapons, and also, you know, the way that the muzzle climb is handled. I think they've done a good job in tuning that just a little bit more. It helps, you know, the M4 stand out from the Scar, and the M60 stand out from the M249 Bravo, and so on and so forth. I think they did a better job, but I still don't think it's as good as it could have been. And for a gameplay experience like The Division, where you're constantly shooting, you know, that definitely does drain on it a little bit. It would have been nice to have the overall action of shooting be a little bit more satisfying. And one of the things that doesn't help this are the weapon sound effects. I honestly am not a huge fan of this. Some weapons, okay. Most of the weapons in the game, no thank you. There just doesn't feel to be enough, you know, like enough oomph and kick behind it. And again, I know a lot of it has to do with it being a third-person shooter, but I just don't feel like there's anything wrong with just putting a little bit more bite into the sound effects, regardless of my player perspective. And, you know, when you start throwing suppressors on firearms, it just gets even worse. Like, it's an area of the game where I think there's room for massive improvement, and where I personally would have saw a lot more enjoyment, as it is a shooting game. It's a third-person shooter. I'm shooting a lot. I would really have liked to see the weapon sounds just be a little bit more high quality. Some of the, there's a few that sound really good. I really like some of the pistols, the 1911. I think the Super 90 shotgun, most of the shotguns have a nice sort of tactical, load feel to them. Like I'm firing a tactical load that's more on the lighter side, not a lot of, not a lot of shot in it, or however I would run it. Some of them are good, but most of them just not doing too well for me personally. I have to be completely honest. But in terms of the actual handling, like I said, I think they've made improvements. The game feels a lot better than it did in beta. Let's just put it that way. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover in terms of first impressions. In terms of the game's audio and its sound outside of the gunplay, there's some good stuff. There's a part of me that really wants the radio that we see broadcasted in a lot of the safe zones, the safe houses essentially, to be available to the player as they're roaming throughout the wasteland, or throughout, the wasteland in New York City, I should say. I just feel like that would have brought a little bit more life to the game. There's a few cases where the radio is on, there's some Christmas-style music playing, and that really, it just adds a bit of life to the world. I'd like to see a little bit more of that. I would have liked to see a little bit more of that, I should say. But overall, the ambient, sound, like just the snow falling and a lot of the stuff you get from the environment, distant gunshots, and stuff when you're outside of the dark zone. I think all that stuff's, really bang on. And that kind of ties into with what I said about the overall environment and the atmosphere of the game. Visually, the game is still impressive to me. I know it looks better on my PC when I played the PC version, but as you guys are seeing footage from the Xbox One here, it still looks really damn good. We can complain all day long about what they showed at E3. The plain and simple fact is, over a year and a half ago now, Ubisoft Massive, they showed us what the real Division looks like. They didn't lie to us and tell us that's what the game was going to look like and then release something completely different like they did with Watch Dogs. So I'm not going to bag on them for that. And I still, like I said, I think the game looks fantastic. Graphical quality for me isn't just about the number of polygons on screen. It's about building atmosphere, building an environment that feels alive and feels like it should. I should feel like I'm outside in the middle of frickin' winter in New York City, and I feel like they've nailed that. So that's something that really has been a big bonus, a really enjoyable element of the Division experience for me thus far. I know there's probably some things I'm missing, guys, but you're going to be seeing a lot more Division coverage from me in the future. There's a lot more that I want to talk about. We're going to be getting into some of the noob tip guides very soon. I'm going to be talking about doing a medic build, I believe, because that's the character that I'm currently focusing on right now. And I'm going to be continuing to push my way towards level 30 so we can start checking out some of that awesome end game content. And yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm really enjoying the Division. I genuinely am. I think the best way to close this out for those of you who are on the fence, number one, if you had the opportunity to play the beta, which like 6.5 million people did, so chances are you are one of those people. If you didn't enjoy the beta, or if you at least didn't enjoy the core combat loop that existed in the beta, you probably won't enjoy the full game, because that's still the sort of combat loop, the gameplay loop that you're going to expect from the Division. There's just more content now, there's more diverse areas to explore and to visit, but if you don't enjoy the combat itself, you're not really going to dig the Division. If you liked what was in the beta and you just wish there was more of it and you wish there was more variety, you're probably really going to love the Division, because it's all of that. There's a hell of a lot of variety. Like I said, the ability to go from one location to another in this giant open world really helps bring each location to life. And these missions, for me, I've played through 6 of the missions now. They're already kind of memorable, the fights that you had, the layouts. Like, I've got some really good stories to tell playing the game just with my brother and with a couple of my other friends. The firefights can get intense, they're fast, you're furious sometimes they're slow and furious. It's just a game that has brought me a lot of enjoyment, and I, would definitely recommend it to someone who enjoys this style of experience. If you guys have any questions for me regarding the Division, anything you'd like to hear me answer, any questions that are going to help you sort of, make the best possible decision you can when it comes to purchasing or not purchasing the Division, please feel free, throw them down in the comment section below. I would very much like to help clarify as many things as I can for you, so you make the decision that helps you be happy at the end of the day with the purchase decision that you've made. And if there's anything else you'd like to say regarding the Division, if you've been playing it, is it the bee's knees? Is it everything you hoped it was? Are you disappointed? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one.